Welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining this IWSC hosted session into all about the world of vacuum distilling, sustainability, sustainability in distillation in particular, a lot of chat about innovation and that area and how it all ties together in terms of what it relates to in terms of drinkers, flavor, carbon footprint, and what the future might hold for rum makers. My name's Olivier Ward. I'm one of the senior judging committee at the IWSC. Because I'm best known for gin, I'm delighted that we have got some serious rum nerds joining the conversation today. I'm joined by Jimmy Harris, the co-founder of Glassmates, a UK-based organisation that helps drinkers enjoy better taste experiences through a variety of fun and educational and interactive ways. We've got Ian Burrell, the rum ambassador that most people will be very familiar with. And it took you long enough, but now I can add to your multi-hyphenated series of businesses author. Of course, his book, Rum: A Tasting Course, is out now. Paul Williams, the founder of Bingil Bay Distillery over in Queensland and Australia, and Russ Wakeham, the co-founder of Two Drifters Distillery based in Devon here in the UK. Welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining the conversation today.
Cheers, guys. Yeah. Great to hang out with an illustrious panel.
So let's start by setting the stage for the conversation today. You know, we're here to talk about, you know, vacuum distillation in particular, but you know how that will extrapolate outwards into sustainability and into process and into ways drinkers understand rum currently. But I'm really keen on really talking about vacuum as the vehicle on which we can discuss it all. Ian, if you can kick off, if that's all right. Have you I mean, how often do you come across, or if ever, do you come across vacuum distillation in the context of rum? And you know, where is it in terms of the frontier of innovation?
But I always say that what's called innovation is a tradition that hasn't happened yet. Just because certain things that are seen as innovation will become the norm. The first time I actually heard of vacuum distillation in connection with rum was at Mount Gay. It was when Frank Ward Jr. Introduced it to me, because I'd never heard of the actual process before. Not being a distiller, drink a lot of rum, know a lot more about blending, but the actual distillation of it is I've never actually pulled any levers or pressing of the buttons yet. Hoping to get an invite down to Mr. Russ and Gemma's place one day to make some rums. But so yeah, he was basically saying to me, in essence, this is a great way for us to use less energy to have the same output. And if that was the premise, then it makes perfect sense. And because if you're using less energy, you're getting the same type of output. The same type of output, then it just makes perfect sense in a sustainable world, in the world that we're trying to be more sustainable. So that was the first time I've heard of it. And then if we fast forward up until till last year, the newest still that's been brought to Barbados, to the Foursquare Distillery, also employs vacuum distillation. And that particular still, with all its nanotechnology and copper in places you would never even think you're putting copper, it's probably the most advanced pot still that's ever been created. So it's something that I think that's going to take on become a big way as part of rum making. Again, if we're looking to become much more sustainable, use less energy to get a similar or even better output, then I'm all for that. So the more and more companies that can afford to actually employ technology like that, it's going to be better. So yeah, that was the first time I'd heard of it, and the last time, or the last still. But I know there are other distilleries that are using vacuum distillation. I think the distillery in Dominican Republic, Barcelona, also replaced, I think, a couple of their columns with a vacuum still, or vacuum part of the still as well.
And broadly more so in the spirits industry as a whole. Of course, if you're making vodka, continuous distillation, and some of these big giant rigs making neutral spirits in other parts, it's as you say, it's a big part of saving energy and heat. And Paul, you're behind you are two. They're not submarines, that they look like submariner equipment, but they are absolutely ginormous stills. Yeah, they're ginormous stills that are operating entirely under vacuum, and you've been a pioneer in the vacuum distillation space for you know, because rarely is something completely under vacuum at the scale that you're operating at in terms of a pot or a double retort, if you want to have it. What inspired you to adopt this technology really, and to use it exclusively for your own production?
Well, actually, it's virtually a whole career, and at my age, that can be a pretty long time span. I've been involved in. I seem to have an inventive nature, and I look at things and just wonder whether it can be done better. So I've had a couple of successes in the past. One became huge, and all the time it's been just a particular industry that may have become traditional, or for whatever reason has not yet adopted modern technologies and so on. That always fascinates me. I love process engineering, and that's what I've done all my life. I stress that I'm not actually a formal engineer. I just learn up the part of engineering that I need at the time and specialize on that. There's plenty of textbooks around, and these days there's even Google and so on. So what brought me into it was the realization that from my previous career, where I was also doing distillation, it was pyrolysis, which is a fancy word for biomass distillation. It was a combustion technology that became industry standard in the end. We're a company all the way through until it became very big, and so learned the business ends of it as well. To answer your question, though, the standout really in the industry. Well, I should say that we as part of that renewable energy company, I was asked to design and install some stills for essential oils back in about 1985, and then I got really interested, because in those days you wrote to people, suppliers, and got a reply back. But I got all these beautiful photos of German stills and so on, and I was hooked. So followed it through, and as in one of my retirements about 15 years ago or something, decided to really give it a go. There were real problems. The engineering problems, it all really came back to a business case. Yes, you could do it, but it was probably going to cost more than the energy saving. And if you were just looking at a cash flow type basis, well, then that wasn't enough. But the world has changed in two ways. Sustainability has become much more important, and especially, I believe, up in your part of the world, probably more so than down here, but worldwide. And I really battled at it to find an economical way to make vacuum pot stills. Really, the reason they hadn't been done was they just want to implode. And these things behind me, they're very thick stainless steel. I hasten to add, we've got a heap of copper in the system in the form of PAL rings, packed columns, and so we've got more copper contact than most copper stills have got. But so I started at the commercial end, as I always do, and said, "Is the great big story a good idea? Is vacuum a good idea?" Well, hell yes. Probably a dramatic flavor improvement, or at that stage, maybe a not was going to make a bad flavor. But I did a whole lot of laboratory work and modeled it every which way we could. But the big one was finding a low-cost way to produce the equipment, and had real breakthroughs there. And in the end, these stills can be made. We found a huge press that can press them out, and they can be made more economically than a standard atmospheric still. So from there, it was all really go, because you get better flavor, the energy saving just from the vacuum. But then we've gone way into energy saving beyond that. We probably get to that later, but
yeah.
So
That's super interesting. So it was partly your background in the first place, but also then actually just looking at the the distillation space in particular within rum, and looking to go, well, what would be innovative, and how could you make it sustainably, potentially at a lower running cost, because you're using less energy. I mean, Russ, I'm really interested in this idea because of heritage and this idea of disruption, and innovation, and as Paul's pointed out, just actually going like, hang on, would it be a good idea from a flavor? We don't, at the point where Paul decided to go and do it, fine, didn't know that, and then now the proof is in the pudding. But it was very much an idea of like disrupting this idea of heritage and building on it. And if you think about traditional Caribbean rum making, regions, and compare them with regions like the UK, there's now over 20 people distilling, 20 producers making rum in the UK, and growing. There are over 60 in Australia, and again rapidly growing as well. So there's a lot of producers in areas of the world who are making rum, that aren't necessarily known, particularly at the moment, as much as, say, the Caribbean region, for its history in rum making. It is innovation, is different processes, is innovative technologies. Is that a big part of the narrative that you, as a producer in such a I'm going to call it the equivalent of New World whiskey, but New World rum, if you want to call it that, is that a part of the narrative that you're very intentionally inviting in, saying, hey, actually we can do this differently, we are new, and therefore we are more disruptive?
100%. I mean, I think the most important thing for us as producers in a region that isn't, traditionally known for producing the product, is that there is literally no point in trying to replicate what's already been done. That's absolutely redundant. And so the only way you can stand out and do something different is to innovate in the way. And I mean, yeah, Paul's innovation there is absolutely phenomenal. That's it's an impressive setup behind you, Paul. But it's critical. I think what else are you going to survive on, unless you've got some point of difference, whatever it is, and innovation surely forms the biggest part of that. And you're kind of the freest. I guess you're the freest region to do it. And yeah, I think it's important.
Yeah, because as I said, there's no expectation or precedent. So you're forging your own way, and as you say, you're deliberately looking for differentiation and going there. Jimmy, I'm keen to bring the drinker back into this, because at the end of the day, it's all about the consumer, it's all about the drinker, it's all about what's in the glass, right? You speak to many enthusiasts, many drinkers. It is how big a factor is process? Because we're talking about vacuum distillation, which amongst a certain group of people is super interesting, because we all love rum, but love distilling as well. And this idea of process is huge to us. How is it made? Does the everyday drinker, does it resonate? Does it land? How much of a factor is process in the distillation and distillation for the drinker?
The everyday drinker. So with the everyday drinker, no. Most of them, as we all know, care about the price point, sometimes the marketing, etc., things like that. The audience that it does touch, though, is the audience that are slightly above that, who are into the process, who will say to you that they only drink from a particular still. Like, you have people that will follow a particular brand, and will stick with that, because as far as they're concerned, that's a sign of excellence. So the idea that there is now this process that can kind of bring out the best out of hard conditions. So for example, English rum, a lot of English rum is blended rum, because we can't make sugarcane here. So a lot of English rum tends to be blended. With a process like this, it allows you to take a raw material and kind of get the best out of it, which then you can then pass on to the consumer without it being at a higher cost, because like Paul said, there's cost saving involved in this, which can then be passed on to the consumer, which means that consumer that's making the change from drinking just whatever because it's at a certain price point into actually drinking something because it's good, doesn't have to go too far from what their pockets will allow. So I think much with everything, we see the word craft get thrown around a lot, and that's beginning to come into rum as well. And so you are getting more people who are kind of like, oh, let me have a look at that. And especially if you've got a local distillery that's local to you, people will then go and support that. So think for the consumer, most consumers will, if they're marketed to in the right way, will pay attention to what they're being told. But if you come at them on kind of a "we're better than you" kind of mindset, that's where you lose people.
Yeah, so a really interesting point you make there, because the question isn't necessarily are you interested in, isn't just are you interested in this process. It's also, well, if we're all talking as producers, we're all talking about spiraling energy costs and the cost of production just being outrageous, and those cost of goods having to be passed on down. It's also, it very much ends up not necessarily today, but certainly in 2, 3, 5 years time, ends up being something that gets progressively even more becomes passed down to the consumer, and therefore accessibility, availability, affordability of products just becomes untenable at the craft end, unless there is something that actually does it, and technologies like this could address that in the medium to long term. Let's stick with flavor. I like this. I like this idea of in terms of how, I bringing the best out of the material, to quote what you just said there, Jimmy. But Ian, what are the flavor implications of working under vacuum, right? Because the minute I hear vacuum, I think lower temperature. Is there something that you can get there with congeners, esters, that kind of stuff, when you're working at lower temperatures, that you can the temperature affects dramatically? What do you expect, and what are the advantages of vacuum in that arena?
Well, I mean, as you said, lower temperature, so you're going to be lower boiling point, as well. So you're going to access certain types of flavors a lot quicker than you may not have been able to do it in a normal environment. But this is where I really switched to becoming a consumer and a drinker, and leave that to the masters like the Russes and the Pauls of the world. They're actually distilling and creating all those flavors from the individual distillates as such. As a consumer, yeah, I'm looking at tasting something that's really good. One of the reasons why I love working with something like Two Drifters, because it's a good rum. But I know some of the process as that tier level above, maybe just a casual drinker. I know some of the processes they're doing over there to basically lower their carbon footprint. So I've got that in my mind as well as having a good tasting rum. I haven't been fortunate enough to try Paul's rums yet, but I'm sure I'm definitely trying to get some samples there.
You have had it. You have had it.
Yeah, of course.
You've had it. Yeah. So when we sat on the board for IWSC, there was a rum that we passed around, and we was like, "This is amazing. What is this?" I have had it then. And it was this.
Oh, cool. Excellent. Yes, I have it. And it tastes good. So
yeah. I remember me and you sitting down and having this discussion around it.
So as a consumer, it's a case of, yes, those rummy flavors, those initial flavors, they can't be compromised by any form of distillation. And if you are using vacuum techniques to save on costs and that type of thing, you can't compromise on taste, unless you're just making a product that's just going to be a well product that you're going to add lots of mixes in there. And I'm knowing these two guys, they're looking at making complex styles of rums with intricate flavors inside that you can sip and savor and understand. So yes, it's great to save on costs and lower your carbon footprint, but if you compromise on flavor, the brand is not going to last that long, as you have lots of money to market it. So I think the main thing here is the question you asked me is, what are the types of flavors in there? And from what I've tasted from rums of that ilk, they are rummy. They are the natural citrus notes. They're the natural vanilla notes they may get from wood. They are the butterscotches and the toffees that you may get from younger rums in some of these barrels, because they're not the big heavy Caribbean rums that have been made for years and such. So yeah, it's rummy notes that you're looking to get. Now, have they been compromised by using any form of vacuum distillation? Well, if I go by the ones I've tasted in the Caribbean, no, it hasn't happened. The newer style rums, that's yet to be seen, because we have to compare that with rums that they're making now and what they may make in 5-10 years time, because this is a long game. But also, when we're talking about rum, and historically, this is not a new thing. Yes, we're talking about vacuum distillation, but there are other types of stills that were brought in to basically save on costs. And to create different styles of rum, some through necessity or some because of governments were telling you that you're allowed to make rum. And at that particular time, when certain places like Spanish colonies and French colonies were making rum in abundance, so they were allowed to by their governing bodies, new technology was around, coffee stills and column stills, the bar stills, where before traditionally they would use pot stills. So this here is like a new wave of rums being made. And I think, as I said, I was down in Sydney literally only 5-6 weeks ago, and just the growth in craft rums down there was amazing. I loved it. And of course, we're seeing that here in the UK, the growth of the small independent rum makers and using different types of technologies to create their rums and their flavor profiles and something slightly different. So it's something that I like as a rum drinker, as a consumer. There isn't anything distinct that I can say, oh, you know what, that's attributed to the vacuum still, when it comes to flavor. But of course, from the back end, Russ and Paul can tell you, well, we're getting to that point a lot easier, and it's a lot cheaper, especially with the rising costs of fuel.
Well, to your point there, it's about control, isn't it? You know, and it's about the human touch and the maker. And going, well, what is this innovation? What was technology like this doing to help them facilitate the vision that they had for the product that they wanted?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give a classic example. Of course, you hear of all these new technologies, and someone gave me a rum a couple of years ago, and they said, "Yeah, so try this here." They didn't tell me much about the product. I said, "Let me just go through it," and I tasted it. And I actually said, and they probably saw it on my face, I said, "This is actually like licking the bark of a tree, and someone's just dribbled alcohol down it." And they were like, "Oh no, but we're using a reactor, and we've just created a rum that tastes like it's 20 years old, but we've done it in 6 days." I'm like, whoa. You've done what? You created a 20-year-old rum in 6 days. No. There's no substitute for time in that respect. But again, they thought it was new technology. It was something that was going to embrace the industry. But they'd obviously compromising a lot of flavor, in my opinion, just because the fact it did taste like liquid wood as such. I'm not sure if the company's around anymore, but this was.
As you say, like innovation is good. So long as it comes with some caveats, and it's the intention behind it and the intention on how it's used, and again, super interesting when you know, people ask me, have you tasted this stuff? Yeah, have you not? And you've done exactly what I did when and same thing with Jimmy. And when people say, oh, but you have tasted this because you scored, I'm like, well, it's a number on it. It's a number. You don't get told anything when you're doing these flights at the IWSC, and until you know, and that's also what makes it so exciting, because you have to then go back and go, right, you know, sample number 7224 is who made that, how do they make it? It's all double blind, and that goes to show the integrity of it, even though we could peek behind the curtain, no one's allowed to. That kind of stuff.
That's a good thing. It didn't stand out as being a bad product, so that was good.
Russ, I'm keen to pick up this idea of temperature, and you know, and temperature and intent from a distiller's perspective. You know, like if the big advantage here on vacuum is temperature, and the ability to control it, maybe lower it if you want to, and it's less about, you know, in terms of flavor making, and obviously the intent. When you're distilling your white rum and you're creating it, even from fermentation stage onwards, how much is that, you know, the degree Celsius on your mind, and how much does that affect you and the way that you look at your optimal range and where you sit from a distiller's perspective?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question, because it depends what you believe is happening in the still at temperature. So when you're up around 80 degrees, and let's say it's starting to boil over with some good flavors, and you've got a load of esters coming through at that sort of temperature, as well as your alcohol, is there some formation of those esters happening at that temperature? Because we know from our own experiments that there's the precursors for lots of the esters that you want to end up with in the product. And I know from the chemical side of it that it's catalyzed by temperature. And so is it a case that actually some of the esters are formed at that stage? I'm not sure. I'm not convinced. It's almost impossible to test at the scale that we're at and with the equipment we have. So I don't know for certain in our own process. But it's definitely possible when you have, you know, one component plus another, and you heat them up, you form an ester. So what happens in the mixture is totally different. That's at temperature. So if you've got a lower temperature, presumably you aren't catalyzing as many of those reactions, and perhaps you're not forming those. But I think what's super interesting is that there's also probably some detrimental reactions happening at higher temperature. And that's where you might see a better flavor coming from a lower temperature process, because any kind of burning, any kind of pyrolysis actually could be happening to some of the more sensitive components that would break apart at those lower temperatures, and we wouldn't know in our process. They could be there from the fermentation, but the temperature that we're using destroys them, and we never get to taste them at the end. And so it would be amazing to try lots of different fermentations and see from different producers what happens under exactly the same conditions, right, on exactly the same still. it's not something we can do, but it'd be really cool. Then you might see that kind of difference. But that's my thoughts just from a scientific kind of perspective.
Yeah, for sure.
I'd love to do that.
Yeah, no, without doubt. I've done similar experiments on gin, pot still versus totally under vacuum, and it's unreal. And as you say, sometimes there are detrimental effects of using heat. Sometimes there are positive effects of using heat, and again, it comes down to the distiller's intent as to what they want to make, and no doubt that has the same thing with rye. Paul, just some context as to how the temperature, because I want to go back to temperature. Always just it's such a big thing for me. For again, I approach it from other ingredients other than molasses or sugar based, but and it's just such a big deal for so many of the craft distillers that I work with. Both at the ferment stage and in the pot itself. What temperatures are you actually distilling at? Just to give people some context as to, it is your boiling point is not 70 something, it is way lower, and to how you operate, and just if you could give us some context on that, and if I'm not mistaken, just to pick up on Russ's point, you're about to do some GCMS testing and some formal evaluation of those esters and that flavor profile, aren't you?
Correct, yes. Well, to answer your first question, we've run at several batches at below 50 degrees. We generally run around 55 or so, and we're about to, and then we did a run today back at the early runs we did were a bit more conservative, and we're only about 70 or 80% vacuum. We're now getting up to about 95%. So we tried a run today back at 77% vacuum, and it was miserable. It was the distill was running slower. We had to run it slower to keep good sensory going, and it really just didn't seem as good. But and the yield was way down. Something that we're noticing is that we get a high yield, like much higher yield at high vacuum, which is back on the economic side is important, like can be 20% or so. So I've taken it to the logical point through trying what ifs and what seems like common sense and so on, the engineering sort of physical approach, which is a perfectly good way to build up a process. But sooner or later, a good idea is to investigate what's going on from a scientific point of view. So we're putting on a very high level scientist, and he gets, it must be the dream job really, he gets to equip his lab with what he needs. I'm keeping a pretty close eye on this, a lot of dollars going into this, but so we will have gas chromatography and mass spectrometry, and see, I'm even stumbling over the words. It is rather late at night down here, by the way, and all the other paraphernalia that he needs. It's correct. There's when you research it, different compounds can form differently at different temperatures and all that sort of thing. There doesn't seem to be a lot of information on what really happens, well, certainly not in a vacuum pot still. And there's some, and we're going to start from the state of the art that we can find. And then with the wealth of data that we've collected by 120 now, today's run, experimental runs with massive data logging, we've recorded just everything that we can think of to record. And then we've kept the samples off the still, and after every 6 months of maturity, and basing on that seemingly fact, I hope I don't get corrected on this, but once you put it in the bottle, the new make, that it just sits there and it doesn't change. Well, a little bit of change over the first little while it settles down, but once you lock it down like that. So we've got a long row, multiple rows of bottles, because every 6 months another one goes in front. So we can track out what's been happening by testing all those and against the data, we're going to do a massive exploration of that and then design specific tests to run in the future. But it sort of seems as though the higher the vacuum we go, the better the results we get. We've got some outstanding new make that we think could be sold just as is. It wouldn't be, we can't sell it as rum because if it's not matured, but we could, you know, cane spirit or something like that. It's beautiful. I might bring a sample or two up for you to try when we hit London. And
fantastic. Looking forward to that. Now, and as you know, as you were talking, it was the more you were explaining it in terms of the amount of testing that needs to go ahead, the amount of science and the rigor of that, it is all in its early stages. And you know, I think it's so easy for us to look at this going, oh, you're under vacuum, and it's this black and white type thing going on, whereas it's either this or that. It's a lot more nuanced than that, really. As you say, the level, the percentage of vacuum, the percentage of temperature, there's a lot of different choices. It's not necessarily switch on, switch off. And there's a lot of testing to find the optimal ranges within all of it to find the end outcome that maximizes the potential of the raw ingredient and the base coming into it. I'm keen to shift this conversation into sustainability and the benefits here of using less energy. We talked about it at the top and a little bit, and just to revisit that, because clearly from a flavor perspective, there's a lot of potential, there's a lot of new understanding and certainly exploration of the space. I think the same is probably true from a sustainability perspective. Russ, could you just give us a bit of just before we delve into like vacuum in specific, could you just give us a bit of an outline as to like, look, as a rum producer, this is what you're battling against, because you're making something that's contributing to an issue, but at the same time, you're having to find ways to mitigate, to reduce, to replace, and so from a rum producer's perspective, you know, what are the major factors from a sustainability angle that you're having to contend with on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, sure. So some of them overlap with other categories in the spirits and certainly any kind of manufacturing, but specific ones to rum would be focusing in on the sugar industry. So you've obviously got a contribution to your carbon footprint just in producing the sugar in the first place. It's helped by the fact that your sugar that you produce is, well, depending on your recipe, of course, but if you are using molasses, then only a third of the actual footprint attributed to the sugar is attributable to the molasses. But as we have to consider here at Two Drifters, we're in the UK. Sugar doesn't grow very nearby at all. And so there's a large amount of shipping at the moment, which can't be decarbonized easily. So there's an immediate factor to think about there. So specific to the rum industry, where you source your sugar from matters, and it makes a big difference to your overall footprint. For us, it's around a third of our entire life cycle is tied up in molasses, and is therefore a big consideration. Obviously, then the other bits come in that are the same for any kind of industry. So all the packaging side of things, how you process your ingredients, the energy that you're using at the distillery. Vacuum, we'll come onto it. Super interesting because you can electrify. Equally, we have an electric still that we can run here at Two Drifters, and it runs on 100% renewable energy. So that you're able to do things at temperature under vacuum, but decarbonizing it requires you to switch to electric rather than gas. And that is the simplest way to kind of address that part of the process. But of course, you've got how you get it into a bottle. You've got all the other considerations then in terms of your logistics, and yeah, I could go on for ages about that, but there are a vast number of things to think about. Lots apply to kind of everyone. But yeah, the sugar's the big one for the rum industry.
Yeah, interesting. So you mentioned the sugar and the mileage going in. I know, Paul, you're very fortunate to be based up in Queensland, and less than I think 20 miles away from the refinery, basically, in terms of so that's an absolute an absolute joy for you because it grows all around you, and you're bringing it in from literally down the road. So which is great. But I think the other one that you really hit on just then is the switch to electric, and something where vacuum comes in is obviously in not having to deal with the boiler. The boiler is such a big factor when you're having to build these big units and put it in and house it, and forget the hassle of it. You just don't need it at all because you can just run on electric at scale. And that's the problem really when for context, in terms of if you're building a big craft distillery or even a bigger distillery, scale is an issue. There's a certain point where, you know, electric just isn't enough to heat the massive pot, and if you're on thousands of liters, it ain't going to cut it. And vacuum offers a solution for you to avoid the boiler, which is great because it's just the energy, it's less energy hungry. Ian, you talk to producers all the time. ESG probably a huge factor in the conversation going forward, and environmental reports and so on. Sustainability clearly matters to a lot of them. It's a commercial, it's a business imperative to a lot, and it's moving forward, even if it is a little bit slowly for everyone's liking, if we're being honest. Are you finding that now that some of the lower hanging fruit is being tackled, there's people starting to be interested in other areas and new technology in order to improve their sustainability scores overall, and what they're trying to do, or actually many just still grappling with the absolute basics of it?
It's a bit of both. We're talking about rum producers in the Caribbean. They're battling with on many factors. Yes, you have some of the bigger companies that have had an injection of investment. And of course, sustainability is always on the part of one of the first things they're thinking of, especially when it's let's say a European company that may have invested in a Caribbean distillery. So they always think about sustainability. But also, there's also the challenges in the Caribbean, challenges that have had for many years in also making rum, that there isn't enough land sometimes to grow sugarcane. As such, so the sugarcane has to be imported. Even though they originally were a cane producing country, they have to be imported from other regions. Fortunately, it's in a similar region, but there are islands like, for example, Barbados is only recently, I'm saying recently, last maybe 20, 30 odd years, where they're really now starting to focus on regrowing sugarcane back on the island so they can make a much more sustainable rum, and they don't have to worry about shipping rums from, say, Dominican Republic or Guyana, or Perche coming out maybe from all the way from Asia into the Caribbean, because as Russ was saying, the costs of running a distillery, a large percentage of that is your raw material. If you're making rum, by law, it should be coming from a variety of sugarcane, whether it's cane juice, molasses, or various other guises. So there is a lot of thought process going into a lot of the distilleries that have that money to put in solar panels, to start to regrow sugarcane close by to the distillery, and using much more sustainable methods to make their rums. But I've always said that rum making has always been a sustainable product, because we try to use everything. The sugar cane, you got your sugar, you got your molasses, and you even down to the fermentation, collecting and keeping that carbon, the CO2, and selling that to the soft drink companies down the road to make the soft drinks out of there. So we're trying to reuse, using the bagasse as fertilizer on the various lands, or use it for cattle feed if you're in Haiti. As such, making the clarion there, where they're using that for cattle feed, because most of the route to market is the old school ox and cart, as such. So there are lots of different ways you can do it. But the biggest challenge, I'm speaking to one of the biggest producers out in the Caribbean, one of the biggest challenges they have there is trying to keep up with these standards of some of the European producers of other spirits. Some countries demand that you have a certain score, as you mentioned, and some of that is just not realistic in some of the distilleries in the Caribbean, because they've been making rum there with their equipment and with their material and that lot for over 200 odd years. Yes, things have changed, but there has to be some sort of offset that you can put into place. One of the things I love what Russ was saying is, yes, you can do as much as you can to reduce your carbon footprint, but there are many ways to offset the things that you can't change. As such, we can't grow sugarcane, well, unless you're in the Eden Project, you can't grow sugarcane here in the UK. So it has to be imported into the country. But what can you do to offset that, to bring it down to new? And that's, I'm a big fan of people offsetting, because if nobody offsetted, I wouldn't say we'd be screwed, but we'd be on our way there. But if people are offering baby steps, if people are making their steps to try to become more sustainable, using renewable energies, even something as simple as solar panels, like I'm seeing in Barbados on distilleries out there, that makes a difference, and that helps create that level playing field.
Yeah, as you say, it's a holistic approach that's required, as always, and always you always need to talk about sustainability in that holistic context. Paul, I'm conscious that as we've been saying, look, there's vacuum here, and that's an energy thing. You're also quite big on the 360 of it all in terms of solar panels on the roof, and another place where, again, trying to bring it back to the process of distilling in this conversation of around sustainability, heat recovery is a really big factor, right? There's a lot of heat getting generated and moved, and a lot of energy spent heating and cooling things all the time. Does something like vacuum help with that? And how what do you do in your distillery?
Yes, well, vacuum is only part of the story. Vacuum reduces energy on the heat up of the liquid, but you've still got the evaporation taking just the same amount of energy. So vacuum is a big help, but it's an enabler. I used it as an enabler for various other heat recovery methods. We recycle, if you look at a distillery, or even just go back to basic distilling, like I suppose most of us did at school, you put X number of kilowatts into the kettle side of the still, and you remove exactly the same amount of heat from the condenser. Well, there's any losses in between, but on a perfect efficiency basis. And you throw it away. There seems to be a problem with that. So we recycle all the heat back from the condenser, and we've got various other energy efficiency initiatives. This still behind me can run on about 25 kilowatts of energy. It's a 2,000 litre still. That's around 1/10 of the energy of normal stills. That energy comes from a small 40 kilowatt solar installation on the roof, and we can be charging the electric car at the same time, and exporting and being paid. We haven't paid a power bill in, I think, 3 or 4 years. And so, and that's all very getting rid of the boiler, of course, is such a big cost. And my background, as I mentioned, was combustion. Boilers are just, they say the steam age is gone, but it just won't die. And they're dangerous. They're hard to run. They're not part of the modern world, really. They consume polluting fuels and so on. So yeah, all electric, about 7 or 8 different technologies all playing together, but all enabled by vacuum. So vacuum is simply an enabler to run faster and cheaper and simpler. I run this whole still by myself. It's not automated. It doesn't need to be. It just sits there and runs very simply. And I'm just an old guy. I just run it by myself, and there we go. It's highly controllable. Very small changes to vacuum make an instantaneous change to the performance of the still. It's like flicking an electrical switch. You just take it up, take it down on an immediate basis. It's really a delight to run.
Yeah. And as you say, look, I mean, lower temperature means less cooling demand in the condenser. Running on electric means you can use less kilowatts, ridiculously small kilowatts given the size of your operation behind you. I was envious when I heard that. But it doesn't really matter if the, as you said, the power isn't green in the first place, because you're still having to offset stuff. So you say solar panels, it has to be a big part. Jimmy, where's the consumer in all of this? When you're talking to people and you're like, this is, obviously I'm going to talk to, I'll ask Russ the same question here, because it matters. It sells. Where is the drinker demanding a greener product now? Do you see that in tangible metrics when you're doing tastings, when you're talking to people? They're like, yeah, this really matters to me, and that's influenced my purchasing decision, or are they not there yet?
Not at all. I'm yet to encounter anyone that's been their forefront. But as a society, people are looking around and we are saying, where does that come from? How does that get here? And I definitely feel that it's something that it's important because we want the planet to be here for longer. We want to have things like we want to have these wonderful things to be able to drink for longer. There's a couple of distilleries outside of the rum industry that we've been to that are talking about growing their own trees so that basically in the future there is trees still there for this product. There are things that come from outside of it. So you've had Jack Daniels were trying to make paper bottles, and that's something that it sparked interest. But people, I think, with a lot of these things, people say, "Is it a gimmick? Where does it really sit?" But knowing that, one of my questions I was going to ask when Russ was speaking was around the possibility of running these things on solar panels, so there is no longer that need for an additional fuel to run them, and then for Paul to say that yes, that is there. For me personally, as someone who just cares for the planet, I care, and you have people who are, where did it come from? How far has it traveled? And that kind of, like I said, the people who are interested in their local distilleries. But one of the big things of rum is this idea of what part of the world did it come from, and you get all these different influences of rums from around the world. So we're still going to have a part of that will never die, because you've got Australian rums are fantastic, Fijian rums are fantastic. You've got rums from different parts of the world that all have their own different influences. So that's still going to remain. But to know that there is the long term of it, because you get younger people definitely more interested in these things, because I think it's become part of their culture, part of what they're taught, and etc. Even down to what they wear. There's a lot of thrifting going on, just to kind of say we don't need to be making stuff constantly. As the more mature generation, correct word to use, because it wasn't part of what we grew with. I don't know how much it matters, but I think it's something that we should be, as an industry, putting forward and making sure that it does matter, that people do care about what we're doing in those ways.
Interesting. So less of an influence on perhaps first, in your opinion, on first purchase, or at the forefront of the purchasing decision, but massive from an advocacy perspective, certainly from a younger generation. Russ, is that true in your experience of it? Because you really lead with it at Two Drifters as part of the pitch, and this is a huge part of the identity of the distillery, similar to Bingil Bay in that way. It's a huge part of who you are and why people advocate on your behalf. Yeah, do you see it more as this ongoing connection with consumers, and that's why they keep on coming back, or do you actually see it translate into first purchase?
It's an interesting question, and we often agonize over this because we write carbon negative rum on the bottle, and that's a pretty big statement, so you need to be able to back that up. I still have the hunch that the consumer, so the end drinker, doesn't care as much as I would like, and it's still. Yeah, and I'm conflicted because we always set up the way the distillery is that we're a rum distillery first, trying to produce high quality rum, right? And if you don't have a good product, it doesn't matter about any of the innovation. It doesn't matter what you do. If your product's rubbish, no one comes back, no one drinks the second one. So as a way to capture people at first, maybe, but that only works for so long. So you've still got to have a great kind of product. You're always conflicted. I think it makes a bigger difference for us with the person in between. So perhaps the buyer or the person that needs to fill. Let's say it's a bar chain. They've got an ESG report that needs to go out, and they're looking at two like for like rums. Maybe they're similar pricing. Is it going to sway their decision? Perhaps, and perhaps that happens more, and perhaps that is where we have an advantage. I think. Yeah, you're always agonizing over that decision. Whether that shifts, it's definitely shifted in the 5 years we've been around. Whether it continues, you can only imagine it only becomes more on everyone's agenda.
Yeah, like I think really well put, because sometimes it's the people in the middle of that chain who can make the biggest influence, and so certainly as an industry we're all interested in it, and now people who are kind of, yeah, as you say, maybe the buyer, the decision maker, the head bartender, whoever it might be, is also looking at that criteria and saying, look, I like the product, but I like lots of different products, but this one's got an edge in that way, and I really need to be walking the walk here, not just pretending that I care about it, and this is a visible and demonstrable way that I can bring that into my range that I offer my drinkers, and in time they will care as much as we all do. And as you say, so it's the imperative starts with the producer, and it flows down the channel. So currently a differentiator in the buying channels in the B2B sector, not quite there as you both sort of alluded to at the consumer level yet, but growing, and certainly being presented. From a producer perspective, Russ, as you say, you're making carbon negative rum there. Is there? Do you think there are enough solutions for craft distillers and workable solutions to make rum more sustainably? Is it? It's not easy, but is there more than enough out there for people to do much more than what they're doing now? Or actually, is there really like is it actually quite difficult to get to the point where you're making something carbon negative? In your opinion, yeah. Well, is there enough workable solutions, and or is there a real need for innovation to move the dial forward on this one?
So it's totally possible. It's only a case of money, right? And that's literally the only reason that it doesn't get done now. The way that we do it is use the most expensive way to remove carbon, so the direct air capture, the technology that we use to make sure we have a proper offset, but it's actually carbon removal, so slightly different, and turns to stone, permanently mineralized. That is a really eye-wateringly expensive way to do it. That means that, committing to being carbon negative, you have to build in a carbon tax on every decision the distillery makes. Now that drives the innovation, is what I'm trying to get to. Is like, that's what makes us think about the next best thing, and will make us really, sit up and take notice of vacuum distillation for sure, because I know the numbers, Paul, compared to what we have, and I thought we were pretty good, but he's half what we are in terms of the kilowatts. So there's always things you can do to improve. And the reason we will always strive to improve is because we always have a financial incentive not to pay those carbon removals. So it's in our interest. That's the way the model works. So that's just a long way of saying, yes, absolutely. The technology is there to do something about it. It costs too much, but you could do it if you wanted to.
Okay. And there's a huge
echo on that about it is all down the cost. I invested a small amount in a geothermal distillery, potential geothermal distillery, where we were going to look to harness geothermal wasted energy coming from 5 kilometers in the ground, and a lot of the stalling points has been just the finances to get that sorted out. But if that comes to fruition, we're using waste heat sources coming from the earth to power a still, to power a distillery, even biomes, Asian biomes, then that again, as Russ said, it's always about cost, to actually get the ball rolling.
Paul, from your perspective, this is cost being a significant factor, right? There is no such thing as a free lunch. CapEx to begin with, OpEx to keep on running, but by all accounts, it is, there is it's a high bar right now to set up a little bit, but it is certainly, as you say, in everyone's interest, because it's operationally lower thereafter. So there's, from your experience of having to go all in and create new solutions and new stuff like that, do you feel like the barrier to entry is now reasonable, and from an ongoing perspective, it's actually better in some ways than traditional rum making?
Yes, we don't agree with the free lunch. We actually think it's a free dinner. It is working out extremely well from a financial side, from all sides. I always start a venture at the end. In other words, look at the commercial angles and work your way back and tick all the boxes to see whether you can produce an economic solution. One of the biggest things, and I am really a businessman as well as a mad inventor. And one of the biggest factors in sustainability is actually a sustainable business case. Businesses that fail or that struggle are simply not sustainable. That if you analyze all that, you find a massive, there's people problems, social problems, all sorts of things with businesses that are not successful. So a business absolutely must be sustainable economically as well as environmentally. But having lowered the cost of the capex of the equipment down to below normal traditional equipment by some pretty smart manufacturing methods, which can be just tapped into now. We did the pain so that others can gain. I spent 2 years on that alone, held the whole project up. But rather than just throw money at it, what's the use of that? It doesn't prove anything. So, and then the OPEX, well, we're well down on that. And when you couple that with a premiumized product, and we think we've got that, but you people are more expert on that, we'll perhaps bring up a couple of samples of some other barrels. And if that is correct, well, then you have a marvelous business case ready to go, basically. This could be repeated by anyone. It could be upsized. I've done some sums on taking it right up to 7 or 8 times this size. If someone wants a big distillery, I'd love to be involved. So we think
yes, please.
I'd be the advisor this time, not suffer the pain of the contractors and all the rest. Yeah, it's basically, it is economic.
And as you say, there's no point having something. It always comes down to the same thing, doesn't it? You know, there's no point making something if there's not an audience for it and it doesn't taste great. There's no point making something if you're busy going bust, right? So it's common sense from a business perspective, and actually, but from the conversation we just had, I think what seems to be clear is that new innovation is coming into the system. It is helping. There are already solutions. There are already low-hanging fruit that people can tackle. There are elements that are much broader than just the distillation in terms of when you talk about sustainability, and you have to look at it holistically, base material being one of them. But there are so many other ways that we can moving the dial forward now. You know, we can bring in things like vacuum, not on a either or, but on a nuance. It's like 20% vacuum, 10% vacuum. That might have just saved you 10. If you're operating a huge rig in the Caribbean, actually that's probably all your rig can take, because it's been doing the same thing for 200 years, and you can't really reverse engineer something into that at 100% vacuum. Of course not, because it will implode. But you might be able to do a little bit, or you might be able to do, you know, the fill kit and caboodle if you're a new build somewhere where that's practical to do so. So there are, as a piece of innovation, as a piece of kit, as a technology, it is helping the conversation move forward from a sustainability perspective, and hopefully hopefully moving the differentiation of flavor available to everybody. And I think that's what we're all excited from, you know, just on this note, perhaps to finish off and just to finish off the conversation and what it all means to the end drinker, right? I'm just, because we've talked a little bit about the business and some of the sustainability angles, but, you know, do you think at some point will be how long do you reckon it will take? I know this is going to be a question for all of you in different guises, but how long do you reckon it's going to take to get to the point where technology like this isn't really the talking point? It's what it enables from a flavor at a drink, from a drinker's perspective, right? So you're like, wow, let's, you know, we're talking about new types of flavor, as opposed to having to explain it to them all the way through. You know, like are we I suppose, Russ, from you've had more experience explaining process and differentiation in process than anybody else, really, because you're having to explain to people how you're offsetting it, or minimizing or mitigating it, etc., etc. You know, at what point does sustainability just become, yeah, okay, of course you are, and then it's not really a differentiator anymore? I mean, are we talking, years, light years away, millions of years away? Are we talking like, actually, you know what, most people are almost there?
That's such a hard question to answer. It's definitely not there. I would love to think that it comes this decade. I would love to think that, I mean, there is kind of a horizon, because there's a lot of commitments to 2030 targets from a lot of big players, and they've got no clue how to do it. So they're going to need to think about it very quickly. So perhaps the conversation gets there when you've got people with bigger voices than we could possibly have at the moment. And I think once they are speaking about it, and there are things in the pipeline that are going to reduce the footprint quite dramatically at big scale, that really will change the conversation. But the problem is, it's not just limited to our industry. It's like the transport industry. They need to have a solution for shipping that offers a way to kind of reduce that. And those technologies, yeah, I mean, it could be 15, 20 years before, something we haven't thought of yet pops up to kind of fix that sort of problem. Hard question.
Yeah, Ian, do you think that consumers are very receptive to the idea of sustainably made products, and it helps with advocacy, as we've covered already? Do you think that there's some point I've been hearing this for years now, and it starts to lose its resonance in that way, and because they've heard it so often and for such a long period of time before it really is by the by, I suppose, is that consumer like, at what point do you hit consumer fatigue on this before it's actually been implemented, which is the problem, right? Because, you know, there's a race, you've got to get it done, people have got to care, but at the same time it's like,
I think this is a case of it's always, as you know, brands and having sustainable companies and having a sustainable practice is always about how it's marketed and how it's passed on to the consumer, and then how it's received. I think someone said earlier, you can have the best practices and the best ideas and the best ideals, but if your product sucks, then they're not going to come back anyway. If your product's good, they will come back and continue that conversation, and they become ambassadors for your brand and your story, and they start telling their friends. I've heard people talk about Two Drifter in the way that I'm sure Russ and Jem would love people to talk about that. They don't have to pay them to actually do that, because not only are they talking about the liquid, but they're also talking about their practices. Now, the practices may have brought them to the table, with all that noise around them and such, but it was a liquid that kept them there and kept them coming back as well. So it's a case of, one of the things I always like to think of is invention is so necessity is the mother of invention. And if we get to that 2030 stage, or we get to the stage where we do have to start making some real big change, not only in the drinks industry and all industries, travels again, then we will find a way. We will find a way to invent something or create something to make this easier, and that then becomes the norm as such. And once it becomes a norm, then the conversation will be just about, does it taste good, or which distillery is it from? Just because they may have that brand or that marketing ability to say we are quality because our name's in that bottle. Yes, we do sustainable practices because everyone's doing it, or everyone should be doing it. As such, it's going to be down to the liquid inside the bottle, what's inside your glass. And does it taste good? Because that's what we're seeing from a lot of customers. They are fatigued over certain things, but if it tastes good, they will come back, whether it's lowering your carbon footprint, whether it's organic, because that's the other thing people are getting into and get fatigued about. Oh, it's organic, but does it mean it's better? Oh, it's going to be more expensive, but am I going to pay that little bit extra because it is organic as such? So yeah, it's going to be down to the end consumer, how it's marketed to them. If it tastes good, are they going to come back to the table? And if it is good enough, they're going to become ambassadors to carry on promoting and telling that story.
Yeah, super interesting, because as you point out, it's always a focus on that end product, and that's got to be where the excellence is delivered at, not just in the process of, you know, if your process is excellent but your end product isn't, it isn't going to survive. And as you say, at that point, it doesn't matter if it's by the by, if no one cares about any of the process, and in fact it's amazing and all that. If it tastes good, they'll keep on returning to it. So there's a huge job to make sure that the proof is in the pudding. Which
there's a lot of bad things out there that are that made terribly, but tastes good.
Yeah.
People come back to it.
Talking of tasting good, Paul, you know, you've been making for a little bit, but you know, I think you're 120 odd, 160 odd distillations in, but obviously in Oz, there's some maturation requirements before you can release onto the local market. Of course, winning an IWSC award and a lot of praise for the excellence of the spirits so far. As you say, you have new make that you're super proud of, and that we're now all looking forward. I hope your suitcase is big enough when you come over. How much, you know, like at what point do you start releasing more broadly, just for context, for us, in terms of, so that we can all start experiencing how this technology is playing out in our glass?
Yes, well, certainly we in the next few months we will be getting product on the market. We now have we've got matured product up to nearly 5 years old now. We don't ever plan to release anything much under about 3 or 4 years. And we've got plenty of product there now. So we'll start on that. I think I thoroughly agree with what everyone's been saying, that it's all about the product in the end. You simply must have a good product no matter what business you're in. And we believe that the prime reason really for getting into vacuum was in superior flavor and premiumization of the product, and coming back to the better business case as well through that. The pathway to market for this type of technology, as with some others, is possibly to create a new style or even category, not just in rum, but in all spirits. I mean, there's a lot of spirits. Whiskey, for example, does respond to vacuum extremely well, possibly better than rum. Take something like, well, gin is superb under vacuum, and we've made gin. You just get far better, crisper and cleaner flavors. So there's a long way to go, but you know, bourbon came in and did to whiskey, created a whole new style, legislated it, kept people on the rails. Champagne, there's all sorts of stories, and that would seem to be a pathway to take the confusion. I mean, the consumer is not going to really make their mind up by themselves unless they're led by the hand, or unless there's a group action. And I see, you know, maybe IWSC next year will have vacuum spirits. We should be able to win it.
Someone's looking for a marketing edge there.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, but you know, that is actually a really good place to end this conversation, because I think it's because it speaks to opportunity and it speaks to potential. And I think that, you know, if anything, it's been a conversation around the potential of new technology to disrupt the status quo, to maybe even provide a goalpost for some people, or some context as to what might be possible, should you want to do that as a producer, or should you want to look into it. I want to learn more about how things are made from a drinker's perspective. It also talks to the potential of, look, we don't quite know where this end product is at, but everybody seems focused on going and creating a point of difference, which is always great in the world of spirits, where there's hundreds and hundreds of products. Having a real true point of difference is great, but equally, you know, to look at it going, well, stylistically, what might be possible, where is it all going to lead? There's a lot of different angles that it unlocks, and whilst it's just a way of making, it is a vehicle for a lot of change in a lot of ways, or a lot of potential change in a lot of ways. So thank you very much for joining today, and for sharing a few thoughts on where vacuum is and where it's going, and what it might be used for. I really appreciate you all spending a bit of time, and I will look forward to seeing you all at the IWSC Awards coming up in a few weeks' time. And if you're watching this post, it will be, because it's going to be up online. There are other interviews and articles with Bingil Bay, I think, also, and around the theme of sustainability as well, on the IWSC website. Thank you very much, guys.